On the evening of August the 22nd of 2022, Jelena Louise Morris and her boyfriend were at their home in Phoenix, Arizona. Just before 9 p.m., Morris accused her partner of cheating, sparking an argument which ended with him driving off to a nearby bar. In order to attempt to bring him back, 38-year-old Morris and a mutual friend drove after him. They drank alcoholic beverages together at the bar, but soon the boyfriend decided to leave and asked for the keys to their truck. Morris told him she'd thrown them away, but the man noticed that she was still in possession of the keys and attempted to take them. After a short struggle, he managed to retrieve the car keys and went to the truck. Another brawl started as Morris and her unnamed companion dragged the man out of the car. He ended up walking home while his girlfriend and their friend drove off. As he was making his way to the front door, Morris positioned the truck towards the man and accelerated. She struck him with the vehicle, wedging him between it and their house. The woman then backed up and threatened to kill her boyfriend as she drove towards him once more. The man managed to escape and staggered away until he was found by local police and taken to the hospital. He was treated for a shattered leg, cuts, and other injuries. Footage from a neighbor's home surveillance camera had captured the incident, and Morris was taken into custody. The woman was charged with attempted second-degree murder, 1 count of aggravated assault, and 1 count of endangerment. Her bail was set at $500,000. Number 6. Penelope Jackson. On February the 13th of 2021, Penelope Jackson celebrated her 66th birthday along with her 78-year-old husband David at their home in Barrow, Somerset, England. During the celebratory meal, the couple began arguing over serving bubble and squeak, a traditional British dish made with potatoes and cabbage. They were in the kitchen when Penelope grabbed a knife and stabbed her husband 3 times in the chest and abdomen area. The woman then called emergency services and told the operator that David, a retired army officer, was in the kitchen bleeding to death with any luck. The operator instructed her to apply pressure to the wound or throw her husband a towel to stop the bleeding, but she refused. Police officers were sent to the scene and Penelope was initially arrested for attempted murder. She asked for her husband not to be given CPR and told officers she was completely aware of her actions. The woman motivated her attack by calling David a bully and saying she'd had enough of his abuse. She'd reportedly expressed satisfaction upon being informed that her charge had changed from attempted murder to murder, with paramedics failing to save her husband's life. During trial, David's former wife Sheila Taylor said the man had been complaining to her about his unhappy marriage. Taylor claimed he was afraid to leave his wife because she had previously threatened to cut off his manhood if he did. Penelope would come to be known as the pajama killer due to the domestic setting in which the killing had occurred. She defended herself in court by claiming to have lost control after years of suffering through physical and emotional abuse at the hands of her husband. They had been married for 24 years and the woman claimed David had coercively controlled her throughout most of that time. In October of 2021, she was found guilty of murder and received a sentence of life in prison with a minimum term of 18 years served. Number 5. Sheila Ridenour. On November the 10th of 2018, Sheila Ridenour and her 61-year-old husband, Billy, were having drinks and chatting in the garage of their home in Crawfordsville, Indiana. A violent argument erupted after Sheila made a comment about her partner's co-workers. Billy allegedly became aggressive, hitting her in the face, ribs, and legs. Sheila would later claim that she was left unconscious on the floor for a while. When she awoke and went inside the house, the woman saw Billy asleep on a couch and went to get a small caliber revolver she owned for personal protection. She shot her husband once in the left ear, a second time in the back as he tried to escape the home, and a third time in the chin, killing him. Sheila then dragged the body away so that she could close the front door and hid the gun between lawn chair cushions inside a utility room in the garage. The woman waited 2 days before calling the police to report her husband's death and confessed to shooting him. She was taken into custody and charged with murder and failure to report a dead body. During her trial, the woman's defense invoked a long history of domestic violence stemming from Sheila's previous 2 marriages. When she took the stand, the woman cried profusely and apologized to her husband's family. In August of 2020, Sheila was sentenced to 30 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter after accepting a plea deal. Number 4. Crystal Gambino. When 43-year-old Crystal Gambino entered her home in North Carolina in late February of 2016, she heard multiple voices coming from upstairs. She walked into the bedroom and found her husband, 40-year-old Giovanni, in bed with Jeffrey Gilliland and Stephanie Sanchez. The latter two, both of whom were in their 30s, formed a couple and appeared to be engaging in intimate relations with Giovanni. Enraged, Crystal grabbed a Magnum revolver and a box of bullets and opened fire on the trio. She reloaded at least twice and let off 15 rounds, killing everyone at the scene. The incident went unnoticed until the 29th of February, when Crystal's brother-in-law called the police, telling the operator that the woman had confessed to her family that she'd killed her husband and his lovers. In the meantime, Crystal had reportedly placed Sanchez's body in a wheelbarrow and carried it out to a burn pile in her yard, where she hid it under debris. In further attempts to cover her tracks, she collected the bullet casings, put the blood-stained sheets in the washing machine, and dragged the mattress outside. The woman left the home before she was able to finish cleaning the crime scene, as she had to pick up her daughter from school. She then dropped off the child with a relative and left town. Officers found the three victims naked and with multiple gunshot wounds on Crystal's property. Further investigations revealed Gilliland and Sanchez had answered to an ad posted by Giovanni online. He reportedly offered the couple cocaine in exchange for having relations with him. Crystal was ultimately tracked down to a nearby town, taken into custody and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. The woman faced 3 life sentences. It was, however, determined that she suffered from documented mental health issues and was offered a plea deal in exchange for her confession. Gambino admitted to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of manslaughter. She received a sentence of 23 to 29 years behind bars for the murder charges and 6 to 8 years for the manslaughter charge. Number 3. Evelyn Zigarelli Henderson. In June of 2020, 911 operators in Dauphin County, Pennsylvania, received a call from 66-year-old Evelyn Zigarelli Henderson, who reported the death of her 84-year-old husband, Carmen Henderson. At first, the woman said she thought her husband of 30 years had accidentally set himself on fire while smoking a cigar. Upon arriving at their home, officers found Henderson's naked body burned in the back patio of their home. The presence of larvae in his mouth and nostrils suggested the man had been dead for longer than reported. Zigarelli Henderson, a politician who'd run for a number of local offices through the years, changed her story when presented with the evidence. She claimed to have fought with her husband the night before his death and woke up to find him burned to death outside. Later, she claimed to have heard him scream for help at 1 a.m., but decided not to call 911 at the time. She provided no explanation for why she hadn't asked for help. The woman kept changing her version of events whenever presented with a new line of questioning. Investigators found that the 66-year-old might have had a financial motive to kill her husband, as she was the beneficiary of his $10,000 life insurance payout. Zigarelli Henderson was charged with criminal homicide, aggravated arson, and arson resulting in danger of death or bodily injury. Number 2. Octavia Carter. In the early morning hours of December the 14th of 2019, workers at the Budget Suites Hotel in Las Vegas were alerted by 3 young children that their father, 50-year-old Johnny Franklin, was injured and bleeding in their suite. Staff phoned 911 and transferred the call to the room where the children's mother, 40-year-old Octavia Carter, answered. The operator asked the woman if her husband was breathing, to which she answered, "Probably, I don't know," before one of the children interrupted the call. Officers were dispatched to the location and Carter led them to a back bedroom where Franklin was lying unresponsive on the floor next to the bed. The man had multiple stab wounds in his chest area as well as a laceration to the neck, and bloody knives were found at the scene. Paramedics pronounced him dead, and Carter, who was found covered in blood with a towel wrapped around her right hand, was treated for cuts. The woman was taken into custody after admitting to killing her husband. In the arrest report, it was noted that she told officers, "I am the devil. God made me this way." As a motive for the killing, Carter claimed Franklin had given AIDS to their son. The woman's children were unharmed in the incident and subsequently placed in the care of protective services. We have our video from a few months back about when the worst cheats go wrong lined up for you after number 1. Stay tuned if you'd like. Number 1. Gladys Gill. On the night of May the 3rd of 2022, Florida woman Gladys Gill noticed her husband, 44-year-old William Gill Paredes, hadn't returned home after work and went out looking for him. Gladys reportedly had reasons to believe the man had been cheating on her. Her suspicions were confirmed when she found him and his mistress at an Orange County home that was close to his workplace. William initially drove away but then returned to talk to Gladys and insisted that it was not what it appeared to be. The couple began arguing and the discussion escalated over the course of approximately 3 hours. Gladys was enraged upon discovering that her husband's mistress had been cashing his paychecks. The fight culminated with William allegedly pushing her into a cinder block wall and threatening her by holding a gun to her neck. He reportedly retreated when his partner started crying. After she was freed from his grasp, Gladys went to her vehicle and returned after 20 minutes holding a handgun. The woman shot her husband multiple times. She then went home where she apologized to her children and gave them $16,000 in cashier checks before heading back to the crime scene. Gladys phoned 911 to report shooting her husband, and officers were dispatched at the scene where they found the man dead. Gladys was arrested on charges of first-degree murder and taken to Orange County Jail, where she was held without bond. Number 9. Rashia Wilson. Florida woman Rashia Wilson, who scammed the IRS out of millions of dollars, openly bragged about being invincible on Facebook after being sentenced to a 21-year prison sentence for wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and firearm possession. In 2015, the 35-year-old woman reportedly stole the personal information of thousands of unidentified victims, using their data to submit fake tax returns and fraudulently receiving millions of dollars from the US government. Wilson boasted about her crimes online, calling herself the First Lady and Queen of IRS tax fraud. She and a co-conspirator named as Morris J. Larry were said to have orchestrated their scheme from at least April of 2009 through September of 2012. The woman had her initial 21-year sentence thrown out in January of 2015 after an appeals court judge ruled that procedural errors had led to her receiving an unduly harsh punishment. However, in March, Wilson was resentenced to 21 years yet again. An online petition for the convicted swindler's release was set up in the aftermath of her incarceration, calling her punishment unlawful and an example of racial disparities in federal criminal sentences. Number 8. Derek Aldridge. On June the 1st of 2017, Texas man Derek Aldridge, aged 46, was arrested for scamming women he met on dating sites. The man had multiple aliases he used in order to seduce his victims, including Rich Taylor and Richard Peterson. A warrant for his arrest had been issued in December of 2016. However, he managed to evade capture while using new profiles to continue his scams. At various points, pretending to be a doctor, a lawyer, and a military man. Most of the women he targeted lived in Minnesota, California, and Arizona. Aldridge used different pictures he'd stolen from unsuspecting men's social media accounts to conceal his true identity. One of his victims, identified only as Linda, told the police that Aldridge had pretended to be a reservist in the Navy who was going after a PhD in political science. He even managed to acquire a military uniform, as well as a Purple Heart and Silver Star, all of which he asked Linda to keep at her residence. Aldridge reportedly stole Linda's entire life savings, which amounted to over $200,000 before she uncovered his lies. Before his 2017 arrest, Aldridge had already been convicted of over 10 felonies. In August of 2018, he was sentenced to 24 years behind bars after pleading guilty to several counts of mail fraud and identity theft. Number 7. Jamie Petroni Codrington. 42-year-old Jamie Petroni Codrington, an administrator at the Yale School of Medicine, was sentenced to 9 years in prison for fraud and tax evasion on October the 13th of 2022. Earlier that year, the Connecticut woman had pleaded guilty to stealing over $40 million in electronics from the Department of Emergency Medicine over the course of nearly a decade. By reaching an agreement with prosecutors, she avoided facing a possible sentence of 23 years behind bars on more serious charges. Petroni Codrington admitted to selling the computers and other high-end electronic items, the proceeds of which she then used to purchase 4 houses, a $5,000 Louis Vuitton bag, as well as half a dozen cars for her family. Number 6. Renan Augusto Gomez, a scam artist known as the Brazilian Tinder swindler, was arrested on September the 21st of 2022 after crashing his car at the conclusion of a police chase. The 36-year-old man was given his nickname by several media outlets following the release of the Netflix documentary The Tinder Swindler, centered on the eponymous Simon Levy's crimes. Gomez seduced at least 7 women on dating sites such as Tinder, Happen, and Lovo, using fake sob stories to convince them to help him financially. He didn't use his real name, instead identifying himself as Augusto Keller. The man reportedly targeted women aged between 34 and 40 with high-paying jobs and who were looking for love. Gomez even met the families of some of the women he ended up swindling. In several cases, he offered his romantic interests the opportunity to invest in a purported business venture, but once the women wired him the money, he would move on to his next target. Police believe there have been many other victims who hadn't come forward at the time of his arrest and urged the public to contact the authorities if they had any further information regarding Gomez's criminal activity. Number 5. Simon Levy. Between 2017 and 2019, Simon Levy, a man in his early 30s, scammed over $10 million from dozens of victims all across Europe. Born in Israel, he emigrated to several different countries in the European Union while orchestrating his romance scams, tricking women he met through Tinder into dumping their money into his Ponzi schemes. The man's crimes became public after an article describing his modus operandi was published in a Norwegian tabloid and later exposed in a Netflix documentary. Levy, the so-called Tinder swindler, left Israel after spending time in prison for fraud. He changed his name to avoid questions about his past, a method he would use several more times prior to his eventual arrest. He met women through Tinder, seducing them by flashing an extravagant lifestyle, which was bankrolled by the funds he'd stolen from previous victims. Once he gained their trust, Levy would ask for more and more money from the women he scammed, before disappearing and moving on to his next target. In 2019, Levy was arrested by Interpol for using a forged passport and spent 5 months in an Israeli prison. He was released early due to pandemic-related safety measures. The man adamantly denied the accusations of his alleged victims. Since the Netflix documentary was released, he's been attempting to profit from the resulting media attention. Levy reportedly hired a talent manager and created a Cameo account, charging between $200 and $2,000 for personalized videos. Number 4. Desiree Bloxos and Paul Hill. Between 2012 and 2017, Texas couple Desiree Bloxos and Paul Hill posed as siblings in order to scam at least 6 men out of more than $3 million. The first confirmed victim was Danny Barnett, aged 72, who met then 32-year-old Bloxos at a post office back in 2012. She told Barnett that she was a widow, and after a brief romance ensued, she claimed that she had cancer and couldn't afford the requisite treatment. They married 4 months after their initial meeting so that Bloxos could have access to her new husband's insurance. Over the next few months, Barnett bought his new bride a car and a house. Although they didn't live together, Bloxos introduced him to her purported brother, Paul Hill, who was in reality the father of her children and common-law husband. During the years that followed, Bloxos repeated the scam with several other men, all over the age of 65, pretending to need money for medical or legal issues, or requesting her partners to invest in her brother's business. Among those victimized by the pernicious scheme was James Olmsted, a retired military man Paul Wilbur, Richard Lima, Lois Cardan, and Douglas Wingo, a veteran suffering from dementia. It was Wingo's sister, Patty Hamilton, who became suspicious after discovering that Bloxos had obtained multiple credit cards in her brother's name. Bloxos and Hill were ultimately taken into custody, and in November of 2018, the former was sentenced to 85 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution to her victims. 2 years later, Hill was found guilty of money laundering, theft, and organized criminal activity, for which he was sentenced to 125 years. After appealing the decision and requesting to serve his time concurrently, the man's prison term was reduced to 85 years. Number 3. Kelly Bryan. Actress and singer Kelly Bryan, known for her roles in Hollyoaks and Loose Women, opened up about being the victim of a love scam in the hopes of helping other women notice the warning signs. In February of 2022, during an episode of Loose Women, a talk show she co-hosts, Bryan explained that she was manipulated into a coercive relationship by a man she refrained from mentioning by name. She detailed how her partner had isolated her from family and friends and had gained control of every aspect of her life before she managed to break free from his manipulative behavior. Bryan only caught on to her partner's lies after she received a call from her bank and discovered several large transactions had been made without her authorization. She'd apparently been so embarrassed about being conned that she didn't make any attempts to recover the stolen money or contact the authorities. Although Bryan didn't tell her co-host exactly how much money she'd been swindled out of, she did say that the scammer had purchased high-end cars and other expensive luxury items with the ill-gotten funds. Number 2. Wilson Jackson. Wilson Jackson, a 37-year-old resident of Woodland Hills, California, was arrested on May the 23rd of 2019 for posing as a millionaire on dating sites in order to swindle money from unsuspecting women. Many of his victims didn't live locally. Instead, Jackson would make his dates fly from out of state, with promises of reimbursing them for their various travel expenses. Following their rendezvous, the man would wait until the women fell asleep before going through their wallets. Then, Jackson stole their identities using their credit and debit card information to buy fancy clothes, pay bills, and even purchase gifts and lavish vacations for other victims. He was thus able to maintain the illusion that he had seemingly never-ending funds and convinced women to give him loans by fabricating situations in which he couldn't readily access his money. It's not known precisely when Jackson started his predatory schemes, but by 2011, Orlando police had become well aware of his crimes, considering him a person of interest in several cases of credit card fraud. One of his victims, Octavia Ridenour, an Air Force veteran, told police that he'd purchased a plane ticket for her to visit him in California, but after it turned out to be fake, he claimed to have been scammed and requested that she buy a new one with her own funds, promising to reimburse her later. When she returned home, Ridenour realized that Jackson was not only ignoring her texts and calls, but that he'd stolen her credit card information to make more than $7,000 worth of purchases. The serial dating scammer faced 33 felony charges, to which he pleaded not guilty during a preliminary court hearing. Number 1. Rubin Sarpong. On May the 3rd of 2022, New Jersey man Rubin Sarpong was sentenced to 14 years behind bars for money laundering, wire fraud, and tax evasion in connection to a romance scam he'd orchestrated, along with several co-conspirators, most of whom resided in Ghana. The 38-year-old defrauded over $2 million from at least 40 victims. The group posed online as military men looking for love. When they zeroed in on a target, they claimed that they were stuck overseas and needed money in order to release gold bars or other goods that the Syrian government had seized. Cash, money orders, and checks were transferred to different bank accounts linked to Sarpong, who would continually fabricate new complications that precluded him from resolving his supposed predicament. Sarpong pleaded guilty to all counts in order to avoid a harsher sentence, agreeing to pay restitution to 36 victims, as well as over $380,000 to the IRS. It was reported that because most of the man's accomplices weren't from the US, it's unlikely they'd be prosecuted for their crimes. Thanks for watching. Would you rather find out that your partner was cheating or running a money scam on you? Let us know in the comments section below.